We've all seen the Final Destination movies, or at the very least heard of the premise. People survive unbelievable situations which were supposed to leave them dead. Then, they end up dying shortly afterwards from something that has no relation to the original situation. Although death is something that comes with life, these stories are just too bizarre to write off as coincidences. Today, we will look at 3 people who cheated death only for death to come back to find them shortly afterwards. During the 1977-78 college basketball season, the Evansville Purple Aces men's basketball team represented the University of Evansville during that year's NCAA Division I men's basketball season for the first time. Though the Purple Aces were a small school with only about 2,500 students at the university in southwest Indiana, Evansville had won 5 national championships in Division II. On December 13, 1977, the team, head coach Bobby Watson, members of his staff, and a few fans boarded a plane at the Evansville airport. They were on their way to Tennessee for a game against Middle Tennessee State. Unfortunately, they never made it. Improper weight distribution and failure of the crew to remove external safety locks caused the plane to crash into a muddy hillside next to a ravine not long after takeoff. The whole team was gone, except for one player, David Furr. David was not able to play in the game against Tennessee State due to a severe ankle injury he incurred during practice and was expected to sit out the rest of the season. Sadly, David's life was not spared for long. 2 weeks later, 18-year-old David and his 16-year-old brother Byron were on their way home from watching a nearby high school basketball tournament when his car hit a patch of ice on the road, and he collided with a pickup truck driven by Leroy Wakefield. Sadly, both David and his brother were thrown from the car and pronounced dead at the scene. On June 2, 2012, while visiting Canada, Jessica Gowie, an aspiring sportscaster, decided to head to a Toronto mall to do some shopping. During her visit, Jessica entered the Eaton Center food court and stood in line to grab a burger when she suddenly had an overwhelmingly strange feeling that led her to leave the food court and eat outside instead of inside as she initially planned. At 6:20 p.m., Jessica left the food court, and just 3 minutes later, at 6:23, Christopher Husbands pulled a gun from his satchel when a group of 5 men walked by him. He then fired 14 bullets in the crowded dining area, killing 2 people and injuring 6 in the very spot where Jessica had just been. Jessica narrowly escaped being in the midst of the deadly crossfire. However, next time she wouldn't be so lucky. About a month later, on July 20th, 2012, now in Aurora, Colorado, Jessica and her friend Brent made plans to go to the midnight movie premiere of The Dark Knight Rises. During the screening, 24-year-old James Holmes, dressed in tactical gear, entered the Century 16 movie theater and set off tear gas grenades and shot into the audience with multiple firearms. Jessica was tragically shot twice, once in the leg and another in the head, and would unfortunately die as a result of her injuries. July 6, 2013, 16-year-old Meng Yuan boarded Asiana Airlines Flight 214. She was on her way to Southern California from China and was planning to visit Stanford University and attend a summer camp. During landing into the San Francisco airport, the Boeing 777 aircraft, which investigators said was traveling slower than it should have been, struck the end of the runway with its tail and then slid down the tarmac. It was later discovered that the pilots inadvertently deactivated the plane's key control for airspeed, among other errors, which ultimately caused the crash. When the Asiana flight clipped a seawall, it burst into flames. 3 of the 180 people on board died as a result of the accident. Sadly, all 3 were minors. 2 of the fatalities were sitting in the tail section of the plane, which snapped off when it hit the seawall. However, the 3rd would die in the most bizarre way. As first responders rushed to the scene, fire trucks were seen spraying the burning aircraft in an attempt to put out the fire. Meng Yuan had luckily survived the crash, but was run over and killed by 2 rescue vehicles while she lay injured on the ground. Apparently, when responders pulled Ye from the plane, her body was hidden as it was covered in the foam that was sprayed to put out the blazing fire from the wreckage. A coroner's report reported that she suffered internal hemorrhages and crushing injuries consistent with being struck by a motor vehicle. In 2013, Jessica de Lima helped organize a party for university students at the Kiss nightclub in Santa Maria, South Brazil. The 21-year-old was meant to go, and even sold tickets for the event. But as she was getting ready to leave her home that night, her boyfriend, 20-year-old Adriano Stefano, called, begging her not to go. Luckily, Jessica listened and stayed home because flames would rip through the packed club after a band member lit a firework on stage, which ignited the club's foam roof. 238 people died, many after inhaling toxic fumes, while others were crushed in a battle to escape the blaze in the early hours of January 27, 2013. This would become the worst nightclub fire in more than a decade. Unfortunately, the nightmare did not end there. 4 days later, on January 31st, Jessica traveled by car to the town of Toledo, which is about 80 miles from where Jessica lived in Santa Maria, where Adriano had been working. The two planned to return together to Santa Maria on Saturday night. Sadly, fate caught up to Jessica, and just a few miles into the trip back home, their Volkswagen Golf collided head-on with a truck. Jessica died instantly, and Adriano, who would have turned 21 the next day, died later in hospital. On September 11, 2001, when terrorists struck the World Trade Center, Hilda Male was able to escape during the tragic attacks from the ground-floor restaurant where she worked in that complex. Unfortunately, her luck would end there. Hilda, 26, was headed home to the Dominican Republic to vacation with her mother and her 2 children, who had traveled there from New York 2 weeks earlier. She boarded American Airlines Flight 587 on November 12, 2001, so just 2 months and 1 day after the terrorist attacks. The Airbus flying the route crashed into the neighborhood of Bell Harbor on the Rockaway Peninsula of Queens, New York City shortly after takeoff. Sadly, Hilda was one of the 265 people who died as a result of the crash. The crash of Flight 587 is the second deadliest aviation accidents in U.S. history, behind the crash of American Airlines Flight 191 in 1979. I'd like to take a second to thank you for tuning into Horrific Nightmares. If you would like to support this channel, you can leave a comment below and hit the like button. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with anyone you know who may enjoy it as well. And if you already aren't, I hope you would consider subscribing to the channel so that you won't miss any of my upcoming episodes. Once again, thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.